You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. I hope you enjoyed the interview that I did with Dr. Pamela Morrison-Wiles about Kyrie Irving. This show is going to be all about the NHL Trade Deadline, and the show after this one that you'll get this evening will be a grade on what the New York Islanders did. I gotta say, 24 hours ago, it was going to be a very, very bad grade. It was going to be somewhere from a D+ to a D-. But now, that grade is going to be very, very positive. I'm going to leave you in suspense as to what it'll be exactly. Because, well, I'm not sure what it's going to be. There's still time for Lamoriello to do something else. I don't know what else he can do, but you know what? I give him credit. I give Lou Lamoriello a ton of credit, and I'll get into Pajot now. I give him a ton of credit for getting the guy that he needed to get. J.G. Pajot has been linked to the Islanders for weeks. And there was a time when it seemed like it was not going to happen. Like 24 hours ago, I was killing Lamoriello. Killing him for not doing anything to address the scoring need. You know, I don't care how they did against the Red Wings and the Sharks. I care how they do against the Penguins and the Capitals and the Flyers, teams like that. And they were playing like a team that was going to get destroyed in the first round. But now with this trade, that changes things. Pajot is the perfect fit for the Islanders. He's already their leading goal scorer. He has 24 goals. Brock Nelson was their leading goal scorer with 22. Pajot is now their third leading point scorer. Barzal 52, Nelson 49. He is also incredibly sound on the penalty kill. Now, while their power play has gotten more heat in terms of special teams, Jim Hiller has done a terrible job. Their penalty kill has just been average. They're 16th in the league. Can always be better. This trade makes a ton of sense for the Islanders. I commend Lou Lamoriello for doing it. I think they're done now. I don't think they need to do anything else. I won't begrudge Lamoriello for not doing anything after this trade. He bolstered the defense with Green. He bolstered the scoring with Pajot. There's no room for anyone else. If you go through the lines, it's pretty cluttered. Now, granted, Cizikas and Clutterbuck are hurt, so that changes things. But when they come back, they're going to have an issue. And it's a great problem to have. There will be other injuries. There's no question. But, regardless, great trade for the Islanders. I commend Lou Lamoriello for doing it. He's shut me up for a little bit. He has shut me up until at least June. I reserve the right to criticize him at the draft if there are rumors of big names being moved, or there are big names moved, and the Islanders don't get them. I know that they traded a bunch of their draft picks, but they still have prospects. But Lamoriello did a great thing here, and I will give him credit where credit is due. This is a great trade for the Islanders. Makes a ton of sense. They're also talking about extending him. Would make perfect sense. It'll also lessen the sting of the draft picks that the Islanders gave up. And look, the Islanders gave up a lot here. They gave up a top 3 protected first-round pick, which hopefully won't be an issue. The only way that's an issue is if the Islanders miss the playoffs. And if they miss the playoffs, we have bigger problems. They gave up a second-rounder this year. Okay, fine. And they gave up a third-rounder in 2022 that only conveys if the Islanders win the Stanley Cup this year. I don't think the Islanders are winning the Stanley Cup this year. It's certainly possible. Getting Pajot does change things. But if I was a betting man, I still wouldn't bet on the Islanders winning the Stanley Cup. Kills me to say it, but it's true. It's a lot to give up for Pajot. There's no question. There's no question that that's a lot to give up for a third-line center. But Lamoriello had to do it. When you're making trades, you always want to trade from a position of strength. Lamoriello traded from a position of weakness. He waited a long time to make this trade. He waited until about 5 or 6 hours before the deadline. That's not good. He had no leverage. And we know that the Flyers were supposedly interested in Pajot, so the Senators were probably playing the Flyers against the Islanders. The last thing that Lamoriello would have wanted is to see J.G. Pajot in a Flyers uniform. Because then it would have meant that the Islanders probably would have pivoted to Nate Thompson like the Flyers did. All due respect to Nate Thompson, but he's not as good as J.G. Pajot. This is a lot to give up for Pajot. If you want to call this a 51-49 edge for the Senators, I don't mind that at all. But it makes a ton of sense for the Islanders. I commend them for it. I will be at the Coliseum tomorrow to watch his first game. And I'm really excited to see what Pajot can do. He's a guy who doesn't shy away from the big moment also. He is an excellent playoff performer. In only his third ever playoff game, he had a hat trick. In 35 career playoff games, he has 16 points. And he's a +9. He's the perfect fit for the Islanders. Like I said, I commend Lou Lamoriello for doing this. Seriously, I'll give him an ovation. I have no problem with that. Is it a lot to give up? Yes, but he had to do it. Just that simple. You can't begrudge a GM for doing what he had to do. Moving over now to the Cody Eakin trade. Now, before I get into it, I just want to say that in my intro to today's Brooklyn Nets show, I said that Eakin was the only trade that had happened as of that moment. And that show was published at 6 a.m. today. Well, that wasn't true. Kovalchuk and Mike Green were traded in that time span also. I'll give you a peek behind the curtain. That interview was taped yesterday afternoon. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. The way that this show is done, I can't do live interviews. And I don't think it takes away from the show at all. Nothing changed with Kyrie Irving in that time span, so there's nothing wrong with doing the taped interview. The only thing was saying that Eakin was the only trade. Now, I feel bad about that. It makes me sound like an idiot. And I do really, really feel bad about that, but that's why I said that about Cody Eakin. At the time, it was correct. I shouldn't have said anything, but it's really not the end of the world. At the time it made sense, but the way that you heard it, it didn't. That's what happened. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. It's really not a big deal. I just had to say that for my own sanity. Okay, back to Cody Eakin. We all know that Eakin has had a disappointing year this year. After getting 41 points last year, this year he only has 10 points. A lot of players from Vegas have taken a step back this year. It's why they fired Gerard Gallant. I don't like that decision, but Pete DeBoer has him playing really well, so hey, it worked out. George McPhee knows what he's doing. There's no question about that. To get a 4th round pick that can become a 3rd for him is a great get for McPhee. As for the Jets, Cody Eakin does have talent. He's a guy who you usually can count on to get about 30 points a year. I know why the Jets did it. It's never a bad move to add depth in advance of the playoffs. They have used a lot of skaters this year. I know that. So it'll be interesting to see where Eakin fits. Ultimately, I'll say that this is an even trade. It makes sense for both teams, and I can't begrudge it for either team. Moving on now to the Ilya Kovalchuk trade. Very interesting what happened with him this year. He started the year on the Kings, gets scratched a bunch, gets his contract terminated, then he waits to sign with the Canadiens, and the Canadiens signed him just to trade him. We all knew that the Canadiens were going to trade him at some point. The only issue was where. Well, he ended up with the Capitals. And it makes perfect sense for the Capitals to bring in another veteran for this playoff run. We all know how talented Kovalchuk is. You don't need me to extol his virtues. Is he the player that he was in Atlanta or New Jersey? No. No, he's not. But he's still a very, very good player. A 3rd round pick is a very, very reasonable price to pay. The Capitals easily win this trade, and they are going to be a very, very tough team to beat in the playoffs. As it stands right now, the Islanders will face the Capitals in the playoffs. I don't like that matchup for the Islanders. I don't think that Trotz will be able to beat his old team in a 7-game series. It'll be a fun series, though. I could see that series going 6 games. I'll obviously watch every game. I remember the last time the Islanders faced the Caps in the playoffs. It was 2015, and I had just gotten my driver's license. So what happened was I was picking up dinner with my mom at a local sushi restaurant. And it was like 7 o'clock. And the game was starting at, I think, 7 o'clock. Now, obviously, the games never start at 7. They usually start at like 7:08 or something like that. So I knew that I didn't have a lot of time. I had some time, but I didn't have a lot of time. I made a U-turn from the street parking spot that I had over a main road with a double yellow. And I did it effectively. Didn't get into an accident. Made the left onto my street and made it home in time to watch the first puck drop. And obviously my mom wasn't happy. I don't think my dad was too thrilled either, but you know what? If I was in the same situation again, I'd still do it. I don't think I did anything wrong. My parents really couldn't begrudge it. They weren't happy. It wasn't the safest thing I've ever done, but Whatever. That's a YOLO moment right there. Moving over now to the Mike Green trade. And this trade confused some people. Why would the Oilers get him? They already had a great power play. They really don't have a hole on defense. What are they doing getting Mike Green? Well, for starters, they're adding depth. Again, never a bad thing to do when you're making a big playoff run. Second up, they've had injury concerns on the blue line. Oscar Klefbom is hurt. They've gone through a bunch of defensemen this year. Matt Benning, Chris Russell, Adam Larson, a bunch of guys. So they want to add a better player. Mike Green is a better player than all of them. He's a veteran. He's played in a bunch of playoff games. I remember when he was a free agent in 2015. I wanted the Islanders to get him desperately. But, of course, he went to the Red Wings. He hasn't been the Mike Green of old, though, for the Red Wings. And that's where he's gotten some heat. But he's playing on a lousy team. That's contagious. There are very, very few players that can put up great seasons for lousy teams. John Tavares is one of the few. Connor McDavid is one of the few. And it's next to impossible to do that if you're a defenseman. Has Green lost a step? Yeah, he probably has. I don't think he'll ever be a Norris Trophy finalist again. But it makes perfect sense for the Oilers. They easily win this trade. And he will provide a much-needed veteran presence to a young Oilers defense. Moving on now to the Vladislav Nemesnikov trade. And it's kind of funny how Nemesnikov's year has went. He gets traded to the Rangers last year as part of the Ryan McDonough and JT Miller trade. And Rangers fans are hyping up Nemesnikov like he's going to be the next Mark Messier and he's going to lead the Rangers into the future. And then, about a year and a half later, he gets dumped off to Ottawa. Oh, man. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. I never understood why the Rangers just gave him away. Look, I understand that he wasn't the player that he was in Tampa for you, but he still has some talent. You can put him on the third line and he'll be fine. I understand that's not what you traded for. You traded for a first or second liner, and it didn't work out. That's okay. You know what? He's still a good third liner. You gave him away to the Senators. The Senators easily won that trade. And by that same notion, the Avalanche win this trade. All they gave up was a 4th-round pick to get him. That's basically what the Senators gave up in the first place. Nemesnikov will fit in perfectly in their top 6 now because they have a bunch of injuries with Rantanen, Kadri, Colin Wilson, and Matt Calvert. But when everyone's healthy, Nemesnikov will be fine on their third line. The Avalanche easily win this trade. Moving over now to the Vincent Trocheck trade. And this is an interesting one. Instead of getting picks, the Panthers got 4 pretty decent players here. Eric Howla has shown that he can produce in the NHL. You can count on him to get you 40 points. Lucas Wallmark is a decent player. You can probably count on him to be a future 30-point getter. Maybe 40 if you're lucky. Probably 30, though. Chase Prisky is having a good year in the AHL from what I've gathered. and E2 Luostarinen is also having a good year in the AHL. Very interesting that the Panthers chose to trade Trocheck for players rather than picks. Trocheck is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. He got hurt last year, only finished with 34 points, but he was on pace to get 50 points that year. He's still on pace to get 50 points. The Hurricanes easily win this trade, and he will help David Ayres immensely. Shout out to David Ayres, by the way, man. The Zamboni driver for the Toronto Marlies of the AHL, coming in and winning the game on Saturday for the Canes. I mean, you can't make it up. You can't make that stuff up. This is why I love sports. You live for stuff like this. The guy now has a great story to tell his grandkids, and the Hurricanes are actually selling a t-shirt of his that some of the proceeds are going to fight kidney disease, because Ayres has kidney disease. So all I can tell you is I got the shirt. I'm going to wear it with pride, man. Shout out to David Ayres, the first emergency backup goalie to win a game. Great trade for the Hurricanes. They easily win it. It's possible that the 4 players that the Panthers got equal the production of Trocheck, even exceed it. But Trocheck is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. I really like watching him play. I like watching the Hurricanes play. It kills me to say it because they beat the Islanders last year. But they just got a lot scarier with this trade. Moving over now to the Nate Thompson trade. And I remember Nate Thompson vividly with the Islanders. I remember him having a wide open net against the Rangers, and him completely missing the net. Like, you really gotta wonder how he missed that net. He's not a bad player, he's a good defensive forward, but his offensive skills are non-existent. The Flyers wanted to add another defensive forward. We all knew that. And to give up just a 5th round pick for a solid 4th liner in Thompson, a very good defensive forward, is a really smart trade for the Flyers. They easily win this trade. Moving over now to the Patrick Marleau trade. And look, I know that he spent 2 years in Toronto, but it's still going to be weird not seeing him with the Sharks. Him and Thornton and Logan Couture and Joe Pavelski were supposed to lead the Sharks to a Stanley Cup, and unfortunately for them, it just never happened. I saw them yesterday against the Islanders. I was at the game, and they are not a good team. They are very, very far away from contending again. It's amazing how you can fall from being the 3rd best team in the league last year, which they were. They were better than the Hurricanes, to being one of the worst teams in the NHL. It's really, really crazy how stuff like that works out. The Penguins easily win this trade. They just bolster their offensive firepower. Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, Zucker. I mean, that is just scary. I don't know how you're going to beat that team in the playoffs. You need fantastic defense. And even then, the Penguins have great defense. Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry have stepped up to have pretty good seasons. Jerry's having a much better year than Matt Murray, but Murray has won 2 Stanley Cups. You can't take that away from him. All you need is a hot goalie in the playoffs, and Murray has shown that when the lights are on bright, he can usually turn it on. Now, granted, last year against the Islanders, he was terrible, but you still can't take what he's done in the past away from him. He's been in the playoffs 4 times. 3 of those years he was really good. It's going to be very interesting to see what Mike Sullivan does in the playoffs if he starts Jarry or Murray. Regardless, the Penguins are going to be a tough out in the playoffs. I did want to keep this show dedicated to just NHL trades, but I'll make an exception for an NHL signing, namely Chris Kreider re-upping with the Rangers. Just 24 hours ago, everyone thought that he was going to be traded. I mean, I never thought he was going to get traded to the Islanders. I heard some people mentioning that. I heard the Bruins. Bunch of teams I heard. But no, Kreider re-upped with the Rangers. 7 years at $6.5 million. That is a very, very good contract for Kreider. I've always liked him. He's not the cleanest player in the league. He has moments where you want to strangle him, but hey, he's still really good. He's a guy who you can usually count on to get 50 points a year. This year he's having a great year. And look, you can tell he didn't want to leave. He had every opportunity to go to the Bruins, a team that I think he grew up rooting for. I know he grew up in Massachusetts. He went to Boston College. He had every opportunity to force a trade to Boston, but he didn't. He re-upped with the Rangers. You gotta give John Davidson credit. He is doing a great job with the Rangers. What he is doing is really smart. He is identifying players that he knows are keepers, and he doesn't care about any of the former keepers, like the McDonough and Miller trade, Nemesnikov, Howden, and Hajek. Those 3 guys were looked at as keepers. If John Davidson doesn't think that they're keepers, he's going to get rid of them. Same thing with Elias Anderson. He doesn't care about him. You have to have faith in what John Davidson is doing. He has put the Rangers on the right track. It kills me to say it, but I think it is very possible that in a few years the Rangers will retake their throne as the kings of New York hockey. And they have been that for a long time. They haven't been that recently, though. The Islanders have been better than them recently, but no. It's looking like in the near future the Rangers will overtake the Islanders. Gonna be a fun game tomorrow. I'll be there. Always fun. Moving over now to the Derek Grant trade. And like I said before, the Flyers wanted to add more defensive forwards. They did it with Nate Thompson, and they did it again with Derek Grant. Grant is a guy who you'll be lucky if he gets 30 points in a year. He's always had injury concerns, but he's very sound defensively. He's a good defensive forward. He's not great, but he's good. He plays the game the right way. The Flyers didn't give up a lot for him. They gave up some schmagegi that we're never going to see in the NHL. Again, Kyle Criscolo, and just a 4th-round pick. That's a very reasonable haul for the Flyers to give up. They easily win this trade. Moving over now to the Wayne Simmons trade, and this one is interesting. I've always liked Wayne Simmons. Has to overcome a lot because he's an African American that plays hockey. I mean, if you saw the ESPN documentary Willie, you know all the heat that African American hockey players get. It's really, really upsetting. But Simmons has always overcome it to put together a really good career. He's always been one of the better players in the NHL that you never talk about. Really, really underrated. You can usually count on him to get you 50, 60 points. Yeah, he's having a bad year for the Devils, but you know what? Everyone's having a bad year for the Devils. I mean, my God. The Sabres didn't give up a lot here. They're out of the playoff race, so this doesn't impact that at all. All they're giving up is really a 5th-round pick. Also, if he was a guy that they were going to go after in free agency this year, they get a head start on negotiating with him. And look, if he chooses not to re-sign with them or to not negotiate with him, he's a guy whose rights you can trade at the draft for a 5th-round pick. The Sabres easily, and I mean easily, win this trade. Very, very smart trade. Moving over now to the Andreas Athanasiou trade. Yes, I looked at his pronunciation on Hockey Reference while I was saying that. Oh man, I'm telling you, everyone should be named John Smith. It would make my life a lot easier. Kind of interesting how this trade unfolded. Supposedly they were very close to sending him to the Blue Jackets, but the Oilers swooped in and made a better offer. Athanasiou is a really good player, very underrated just because he's spent all his career on lousy Red Wings teams. I don't know how Jeff Blashill still has a job. I understand that if Mike Babcock was still there, the Red Wings wouldn't be much better, but this guy isn't making them any better. If anything, they've gotten 10 times worse. It's time for a change with the Red Wings, man. They've got to blow the whole thing up. And it seems like they're doing that. Steve Yzerman knows what he's doing. But back to this trade, I'll say that it's an even trade. I like that the Oilers are getting a pending restricted free agent, so he's very, very likely to come back. Getting 2 seconds is very, very reasonable for the Red Wings. Sam Gagner is a shell of his former self. He's not terrible, but he's not great. And Ryan Kuffner is a nobody. So, overall, even trade. Moving over now to the Tyler Ennis trade. And I've always liked Ennis. Really small player, not built at all. He's 5'9", 161 pounds. Alright, he's not exactly Bob Probert out there. But, you know what? He's really skilled. He's a former 40-point guy. And it looked like he was going to be a building block for the Sabres for a long time, but he had injuries, he's bounced around, and now he's with the Oilers. Going to be interesting to see where they put him. I doubt he's going to be playing with any of their big guns, but he should provide some good depth scoring. In 61 games this year for the Senators, he's had 33 points. It's a really good move for the Oilers. They easily win it. And they're a team that could make a very deep playoff run. When you have two of the best players in hockey, McDavid and Draisaitl, the sky is the limit. And it would be the ultimate travesty for those two guys to spend the majority of their career in Edmonton but not win a cup. It seemed like that's what was going to happen. Fortunately, though, they're on the right track now, and it's going to be very interesting to see how their careers go. Moving over now to the Brady Shea trade, and this may be where I end the show today. It's 3:19 right now. I don't want to keep you waiting forever for this show, so this may be where I end it if other trades break. I know Sammy Vatanen has been traded to the Hurricanes. I know Robin Lehner has been traded to the Golden Knights. When those full details are released, I'll talk about them. Probably tomorrow, I'll talk about it. So, regardless, back to Brady Skjei. Skjei was a guy who it looked like he was going to be a really good player for a long time for the Rangers. Came up, had a good rookie year, and it looked like he could be the next Brian Leetch. But then he went into a sophomore slump. He's never been able to pull out of it. And the fact that the Rangers were able to get a first-round pick for him is a borderline miracle. Like I said, John Davidson is getting rid of the bad and bringing in the good. You gotta have confidence in him if you're a Rangers fan. The thing about Skjei that I've always liked is he's durable. He's never had injury concerns. You can plug him in, and he will give you 20 minutes of solid hockey. He's not a bad player, but he's not great. There's a point in time where it looked like he was going to be great, but that ship has sailed. He's now just good, and to get a first-round pick for just a good player is an easy win for the Rangers. Although I will say that with the additions of Trocheck, Vatanen, and Skjei, the Hurricanes have positioned themselves towards being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. I'm not going to make a pick until the playoffs are set, but it's going to be interesting to see how the final month and a half just about goes. Okay, so speaking of new Hurricanes defensemen, I do have the return on the Sammy Vatanen trade. The Devils will get Yanni Kuokkanen and a second-round pick. Vatanen was probably the best defenseman available. I'm struggling to think of a better one. And let me tell you, while he's not great, he's pretty good. He's probably going to get, let's say, 30 points this year, maybe 40 if you're lucky. He's a guy who usually tops out at 30 points. So, that's what the Hurricanes can expect here. From what I've gathered, Kuokkanen is a really good skater who plays the game the right way, always tries to set up his teammates, and isn't afraid to get into the dirty areas. So, I'll call this a 51-49 trade for the Hurricanes. I know why the Devils did it. They have nothing to be embarrassed about here. Getting a second-round pick and a good prospect in Kuokkanen is a good haul for Vatanen, and the rebuild is in full effect. Going to be interesting to see what the Devils do at the draft now. Okay, so that is where I'm going to end the show today. When other details come out about trades like Lehner, Barclay Goodrow, whatever, I'll talk about that tomorrow if it's necessary. New York Islanders show tonight about what they did in advance of the deadline, and a very juicy rumor that unfortunately didn't come to fruition. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that Candlestick Park was the 9th blunder of the world.